The soldier came in without a name. That was the first thing Tara Owens noticed. Not the blood soaking through the field dressing on his left side, not the way the paramedics were counting compressions out loud like a prayer, not even the dog. The dog came second. It was a Belgian Malinois, black-muzzled and compact, maybe 60 pounds of muscle and fury, and it was attached to the soldier's gurney by a 6-foot lead that one of the EMTs had looped around the side rail. The animal wasn't barking. That was the part that made Tara's skin go cold. A dog that size, in a room that loud, surrounded by strangers, it should have been barking. Instead, it was watching. Head low, eyes moving across every face in the emergency bay, with the kind of stillness that meant it had already decided what it would do if someone moved wrong. "Trauma Bay 2, the charge nurse called out. "Move." Tara moved. She'd been a registered nurse at Fort Cavett VA Medical Center for 6 years, and in those 6 years she had seen things that didn't fit neatly into any training manual. She'd held a man's hand while he described firefights she couldn't imagine. She'd sat with families in waiting rooms that smelled like burnt coffee and fear. She knew how to stay calm when calm was the only useful thing she could offer. She did not know what to do about the dog. "Is anyone taking the animal?" she asked, falling into step beside the gurney. "He goes where the patient goes," one of the paramedics said. His name tag read Flores. He was young, maybe 25, and he had the look of someone who had already stopped arguing about it. Those were the orders. Whose orders? Nobody answered her. The soldier, still no name, no dog tags visible, the intake sheet blank except for a patient number, was conscious. Barely. His eyes were open and tracking, which was something, but his skin had the grayish, wrong-looking quality that meant his body was working very hard to stay in the business of being alive. He had dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, a jaw that looked like it had been broken once and healed crooked, and hands that were enormous and very still at his sides. The dog walked beside the gurney, not pulled, not dragged. It simply walked, keeping its shoulder level with the soldier's hand, and when the gurney stopped in Trauma Bay 2 and the staff crowded in, the dog planted itself at the foot of the bed and did not move. "I need that animal out of this bay," Dr. Hargrove said. He was already pulling on gloves, already scanning the intake sheet with the squinting look of a man who didn't like what he wasn't seeing. "Someone get animal control." "I wouldn't," Flores said quietly. Hargrove looked up. "Last EMT who tried to separate them needed 8 stitches, Flores said. He said it without any particular emphasis, the way you'd mentioned that the coffee machine on the 3rd floor was broken again. There was a pause in the room that lasted about 2 seconds. "Fine," Hargrove said. "Someone keep an eye on it." Owens. Tara was already there. She had already been keeping an eye on it. The dog had already been keeping an eye on her. She held still and let it look. She'd grown up with dogs. Her uncle had kept cattle dogs on his spread outside of Amarillo, and she'd learned early that you didn't approach a working animal the way you approached a pet. You let them read you first. You kept your hands loose and your eyes soft, and you waited. She waited. The Malinois' gaze moved from her face down to her left forearm, and it stopped there. Tara had a tattoo on her left forearm. She'd gotten it 7 years ago, 2 weeks after her brother shipped out for his second tour. It was a small thing, maybe 3 inches, a rendering of the Ranger tab done in plain black ink, arched lettering over a scroll, simple and precise. Her brother had one on his shoulder. She'd gotten hers where she could see it when things got hard. The dog stared at it for a long moment. Then it sat down. Not aggressively, not in retreat. It simply sat, the way a dog sits when it has made a decision, and it looked away from Tara and back toward the soldier on the bed. Tara breathed. She didn't say anything about it. There was too much else happening. The IV lines going in, Hargrove calling out orders, the monitor picking up a heart rhythm that was ragged but present. She filed the dog's reaction somewhere in the back of her mind and focused on the work. It took 40 minutes to stabilize him. The wound was a through and through to the lower left abdomen. Not as catastrophic as it had looked initially, but messy and complicated by what the X-rays showed was a cracked rib from what Hargrove described as blunt force trauma consistent with a fall from significant height. There was also a mild concussion. The soldier, still no name, tolerated all of it without making a sound. He watched the ceiling. Once, when Tara was adjusting his IV line, his eyes moved to her arm to the tattoo, and he said something so quietly she almost missed it. "2nd Battalion?" She looked up. "My brother. 3rd. He closed his eyes. Something in his face changed, but she couldn't have said what exactly. It was the kind of change that happened below the surface. The dog, from its position at the foot of the bed, watched her steadily. By the time they moved him to a private room on the 4th floor, two things had happened that Tara would spend the rest of that night turning over in her mind. The first was that a man in a gray suit had appeared in the emergency bay asking questions about the John Doe in Trauma Bay 2, not as a family member, not as a colleague, but with the kind of flat-voiced, ID-flashing efficiency that meant federal. He'd spoken to the charge nurse, who'd directed him to Dr. Hargrove, who'd told him that the patient was in no condition to be questioned. The man in the gray suit had nodded pleasantly and gone to stand in the hallway, where he continued to stand for the next 2 hours. The second was that someone had been in the trauma bay supply room. Tara noticed it when she went in to restock. She noticed it because she was particular about the way supplies were organized, not obsessively, just the way anyone gets particular about a space they spend 12-hour shifts inside. And the cabinet that held the IV medication trays had been opened. She knew it had been opened because the magnetic latch had been pushed back in the wrong way, catching on the upper corner instead of seating flush, which only happened if you closed it too fast without lining it up properly. She stood there looking at it for a moment. Then she went to the medication log. The log was fine. Nothing checked out that shouldn't have been. She almost let it go. She almost told herself she was tired, which she was, that it was nothing, which it might have been. She didn't let it go. She pulled up the hallway camera footage from the supply room corridor on the nursing station monitor, which she was authorized to do, and she scrolled back 2 hours, and she found 4 minutes that had been replaced with static. Not blank, not missing. Static, which was different, which meant something had been fed into the system to cover whatever was actually recorded. Her hands were very steady when she picked up the phone. She was good in emergencies. She'd always been good in emergencies. It was the after part, the sitting with it, that she found hard. She called hospital security. The officer on duty, a heavy-set man named Briggs who she'd worked alongside for 3 years, listened to her explanation and told her he'd look into it. She asked him to call her when he had something. He said he would. He didn't call. At 2 in the morning, Tara did her rounds. She checked on the soldier. His chart still listed him as John Doe, room 412, and found him awake, the room lit only by the blue-gray glow of the monitor, the dog curled on the floor beside the bed with its head on its paws. The dog looked up when she came in. It didn't move. "You need anything?" she asked the soldier. "Water," he said. She poured it. He drank it slowly, watching her over the rim of the cup with dark, careful eyes. "The dog," she said, because she'd been thinking about it, and she was a person who, when she'd been thinking about something, tended to say so. "What's his name?" "Ghost. How long have you had him?" A pause. 3 years. He doesn't usually let people near you. It wasn't a question. The soldier seemed to understand that because he didn't answer it like a question. He set the cup down on the bedside table and looked at her arm. "He knows the tab," he said. "Somebody trained him to recognize it. Before me, before you. His first handler." The soldier's voice was level and careful, the way voices get when the information behind them is not level and not careful. Kaya, 42 months ago. Tara stood quietly for a moment with that information. "What's your name?" she asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "Beckett," he said finally. "Staff Sergeant Cole Beckett, Tara Owens." She nodded at Ghost, who was watching them both with that particular alert stillness. He chose well. Beckett didn't say anything to that. But something shifted in the set of his shoulders, not relaxation exactly, but the slight loosening of a person who has been braced for a long time and has decided provisionally to stop. She left them to sleep. She was halfway down the 4th floor corridor when she heard the stairwell door, not the elevator. The stairwell, which was at the far end of the hall, and which had a door that was supposed to be alarmed, when opened from inside between midnight and 6 a.m., the alarm did not sound, which meant either the alarm was malfunctioning or someone had disabled it. Tara stopped walking. The corridor was empty. The nursing station was around the corner, out of sight. The overhead lights were dimmed to their nighttime setting, casting everything in a flat, institutional half-light that flattened distances and made it hard to judge how fast things were moving. The person who came through the stairwell door was wearing scrubs, blue, the same shade as half the staff. He was carrying something in his right hand, small, cylindrical, and he was walking with the particular purposeful quiet of someone who knew exactly where he was going and did not want to be noticed getting there. He was walking toward room 412. Tara did not think about it. Later, she would not be able to explain exactly what she did think about, only that thinking wasn't the primary activity in those seconds. She moved into the center of the corridor. "Hey," she said. The man stopped. "Where are you headed?" She kept her voice the way she kept it during codes. Neutral, present, not a challenge but not giving way either. The man looked at her. He had a broad, forgettable face and close-cropped hair and the kind of practiced blankness that she associated with people who spent time cultivating practiced blankness. "Just checking on a patient," he said. "Which patient?" A half-second pause. "Room 410. 410 is a storage room," Tara said. "Has been for 2 weeks, while the HVAC on that side gets replaced." The man looked at her for a moment that stretched out longer than it should have. Then he moved. He didn't come at her. He turned and went back through the stairwell door, fast, and Tara heard his footsteps going down, not up, taking the stairs 2 at a time from the sound of it. She was already on the phone. Security first, then the charge nurse. Then, and this was the call she hesitated on for exactly 4 seconds before making, the man in the gray suit, whose card she had picked up from the charge nurse's station earlier in the evening without quite knowing why she'd done it. He answered on the second ring. "This is Owens," she said, "4th floor. You need to come up here right now." His name was Agent Darren Quill, and he arrived in 3 minutes, which told her he hadn't gone home, which told her he'd been waiting for something to happen, which made her feel simultaneously validated and deeply unsettled. He had a partner she hadn't met yet, a woman named Agent Brooke Sato, who appeared at the elevator while Quill was still in the corridor and immediately began walking the hallway with a small light and a focused, methodical silence that suggested she did this kind of thing often. Quill listened to Tara's account without interrupting. He had a face that was good at not reacting, but she watched his eyes when she got to the part about the stairwell alarm, and she saw something there, not surprise, but confirmation. "You said he had something in his hand," Quill said. "Cylindrical, small. Maybe the size of a marker. You're sure it wasn't a pen? People carrying pens to patient rooms at 2 in the morning don't disable stairwell alarms first." Quill looked at her for a moment. "No," he said, "they don't." "What is it?" she asked. "I don't have confirmation yet. What's your best guess?" He studied her. She held his gaze and waited, the same way she'd waited for Ghost to decide about her earlier, letting him read what was there, not performing anything. "Compound that induces cardiac event," he said finally. "Administered via contact or injection. Fast-acting, difficult to detect in a standard talk screen." Tara thought about the medication cabinet, the static in the footage. "Someone inside this hospital gave him access," she said. "That's what it looks like, which means someone inside this hospital is compromised." Quill didn't answer that directly. He didn't have to. "Is Beckett safe in that room?" she asked. "We're moving him within the hour," Quill said. "Until then." He paused and looked at her with an assessing directness that reminded her a little of Ghost. "Until then, I'd like you to stay close." She stayed close. The next 6 hours were the longest she had worked in a long time, and she had worked some long ones. Quill and Sato moved through the hospital with the quiet efficiency of people disassembling something, pulling camera footage, interviewing night staff, tracing access logs with a thoroughness that told Tara they'd had practice at exactly this kind of thing. Tara herself stayed on the 4th floor, checking on Beckett every 20 minutes, watching the corridor between checks. Ghost watched her back. At some point around 4 in the morning, Beckett asked her why she was still there. She was sitting in the chair beside the door, shoes on, jacket on, the kind of sitting that isn't really resting. "My shift ended at midnight," she said. "I know." He was looking at the ceiling again, that particular kind of stillness that she'd started to recognize as his default. "So why are you still here?" She thought about it honestly. "Because whoever came through that stairwell door is still in this building," she said. "And because I don't especially feel like going home and wondering." Beckett was quiet for a moment. Ghost lifted his head from the floor and looked at Tara, then put it back down. "My team thinks I got hit by accident," Beckett said. "Wrong place, wrong person, random violence. Do you believe that?" "No, neither do I." She paused. "What were you doing before you came in?" He looked at her sidelong. I can't tell you that. I know you can't. She wasn't pushing. She was just acknowledging the shape of the thing, the part she could see and the part she couldn't. He was quiet again for a while, then unexpectedly, "My brother's a nurse. Medic, actually. Army." She looked over. "Fort Drum." A pause. "He's good at it. The staying calm part. It's a learnable skill," she said, "mostly." Something that might have been the early stages of a smile crossed his face and then didn't quite make it. But it was something. At 5:47 in the morning, Agent Sato appeared in the doorway. "We have him," she said. His name was Terence Gould. He was not a doctor, not a nurse, not anyone whose face appeared in the hospital directory or on a staff badge. He was a contractor, a private security contractor, formerly, now apparently working for people whose names Sato did not share in front of Tara, but which she referenced with the kind of shorthand that told Tara they were known quantities to federal law enforcement. Gould had been hiding in the hospital's basement maintenance corridor, which had its own separate access system and which connected, through a series of utility passages, to the parking structure. He hadn't made it to the parking structure. Quill told her this in the corridor outside room 412, around 6 in the morning, with the particular exhausted straightforwardness of someone who has been awake all night and is no longer managing his delivery. "He's in custody," Quill said. "Beckett's transfer is scheduled for 7. After that, this floor goes back to normal operations." "Who sent Gould?" Quill looked at her. "I understand if you can't say," she said. "Someone who didn't want Beckett talking to us," Quill said carefully. "Beyond that, it's active investigation." She nodded. She was tired enough that the nodding felt like a physical effort. "You did good work tonight," Quill said. He said it straightforwardly, without the kind of professional flatness that would have made it feel like a formality. "I noticed a cabinet latch," she said. "People don't usually notice cabinet latches. People who spend 12 hours a day in a space notice when something in that space is wrong." She paused. "It's just paying attention." Quill nodded slowly. He had the look of someone who had been underestimating something and was recalibrating. At 6:40, she went in to say goodbye. Beckett was sitting up, which was an improvement. Someone had brought him a clean shirt at some point. Ghost was standing now, alert in the particular way he got when something was about to change. Ears forward, weight shifted slightly toward the door. "They're moving you," Tara said. "I heard." Beckett looked at her steadily. "You stayed all night." "I did. You didn't have to do that." She considered this. "No," she said. "I didn't." A pause. "My brother's name is Kevin," Beckett said. "Kevin Beckett. If something like this ever." He stopped. Tried again. "He's good people. That's all I'm saying." She understood what he was saying. She understood the kind of trust that got offered in a place like this, after a night like this, and she received it the way it deserved to be received. Quietly, without making a production of it. "Take care of yourself," she said. "Both of you." She looked at Ghost, who was looking back at her with those dark, serious eyes, and then did something she usually didn't do with working dogs. She held out her hand, left hand, the one with the tattoo. Ghost leaned forward and pressed his nose against her forearm, against the ink, for exactly 1 second. Then he straightened up and looked away, back toward Beckett, back toward the door, ready for whatever came next. Tara walked out of room 412 and down the corridor and into the elevator, and she stood there in the elevator, alone, while it descended, and she allowed herself to shake a little, the way she always did after the adrenaline finished burning off. The private, quiet version of it that she'd learned to do quickly and in private so that she could go back to being steady again when the doors opened. The doors opened. The morning shift was coming in. The lobby had that early light quality, the particular way sunlight falls on institutional floors when the day is still new and hasn't become complicated yet. The coffee cart by the entrance was just opening. She could smell it from the elevator. She thought about Kevin Beckett at Fort Drum. She thought about her own brother, still alive, still soldiering somewhere she wasn't supposed to know exactly. She thought about Ghost pressing his nose against the Ranger tab and the particular weight of what that meant. A dog carrying grief the way soldiers carried it, in the body, in the instinct, in the thing that recognized its own kind. She bought a coffee. She sat in her car in the parking garage for 4 minutes before she drove home, because 4 minutes was how long it took her to fully come back to herself after the nights that asked more than she'd planned to give. She was back on shift at 7 the next morning. She checked the cabinet latch in the supply room before she did anything else. It was properly seated, flush against the frame, exactly as it should be. She stood there for a moment, hands still on it, and then she let go and got to work.